I am 68 years old, and 3 days after my husband's funeral, his millionaire boss called me with a voice that sliced straight through my grief. "Ma'am," he said, "I found something. I need you to come to my office, and please do not tell your son or your daughter-in-law. You could be in danger." His words froze me where I sat. I was still in the living room, surrounded by sympathy cards and half-wilted flowers, trying to accept that my husband Edward was truly gone. The phone felt strangely heavy in my hand, as if the call itself carried a weight I was not prepared to hold. Part of me wanted to believe this was only about paperwork, maybe a forgotten form or a missing signature. But deep inside, something else stirred. A quiet pressure in my chest, a warning I could not explain. Franklin Cole, the CEO of Northbridge Capital, did not sound like a man calling to offer comfort. There was urgency in every word he spoke, a tension he could not hide. And when he said Edward had left very specific instructions for him to speak only to me, my heart jolted. Only to me. Why would Edward leave a message that excluded Jason and Tessa? Why would a man who always kept our family united suddenly create a secret that involved danger? I had no answer, only a growing uneasiness that made my breath feel tight. I agreed to meet Franklin the next morning. After I hung up, the house felt colder, almost foreign. I looked at the framed photo of Edward on the mantel. His smile seemed almost alive in the dim light, calm and steady, refusing to fade even though he was gone. For a moment, a single fragile moment, I let myself believe he was trying to warn me, telling me to pay attention, telling me that something was wrong and I could not ignore it. "So stay with me, and when you reach the end, tell me which city you are watching from. I want to know how far this story travels and who hears what happened next." The morning of Edward's funeral was the moment I first sensed that something in my life had shifted in a way I could not yet define. The church in our quiet Ohio neighborhood was filled with people. Former co-workers, kind neighbors, distant relatives, all gathered to honor the man I had spent 45 years beside. Yet while I sat alone in the front pew, it seemed as though the center of attention had moved somewhere else entirely. Instead of coming to me, people drifted toward our son Jason and his wife Tessa. They accepted every condolence, organized the service details, answered questions with calm authority, and acted as if they were the ones widowed. More than once I heard Jason's carefully controlled voice say, "Mom just needs to rest. We're handling everything." The tone was gentle, but there was an unmistakable edge of condescension, as though I were suddenly incapable of standing on my own feet. Tessa, always polished and gracious on the surface, wore an expression of concern that felt rehearsed. She leaned toward a neighbor and whispered, "Marilyn is very fragile right now. Jason and I are taking good care of her." As if my grief somehow erased my strength, as if becoming a widow made me a child. I folded my hands tightly in my lap, not out of agreement but because I did not have the energy to contradict them. The weight of Edward's absence pressed too heavily against my chest for me to challenge the way they framed my role in my own life. Edward had always seen me as his equal, his partner, but over the past 5 years, especially since Jason married Tessa, something had shifted. Their tone when speaking to me had changed, softer on the surface but hollow underneath. A kindness that bordered on control, a smile that hid something I could not yet see. Fragile. That word echoed through the church more loudly than the choir's hymns. It clung to me, pressing into my mind like a label I never agreed to wear. I did not know it then, but that word was the first thread in a much larger unraveling. After the funeral ended and people slowly drifted out of the house, I sat in my favorite armchair by the window. The room still carried the scent of casseroles and perfume from visitors, but it felt painfully empty without Edward nearby. I was exhausted in a way I could not describe, yet Jason and Tessa seemed full of restless energy, moving through my home as if it already belonged to them. Tessa was the first to approach me. She held a cup of herbal tea I had not asked for, and said in a voice thick with practiced sympathy, "Marilyn, you should go lie down. It has been a hard day for you." The way she spoke made me feel small, like she was addressing someone too frail to understand simple instructions. I told her I was fine where I was, but my voice came out weaker than I wanted. That was all the opening Jason needed. He sat across from me, folded his hands, and leaned forward like a doctor delivering concerning news. "Mom," he began, "Tessa and I have been talking. We really don't think you should stay in this house alone. It's too big, too many risks if you fall or something happens." He exchanged a look with Tessa, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I asked what he meant, though a sinking feeling already formed in my stomach. Jason took a breath. There are some very nice senior living communities, safe places, good staff, people your age, activities. You would not be lonely. Senior living. I felt the words land heavy inside me. Tessa stepped closer and added quickly, "It is not a nursing home. They're beautiful places, Marilyn. You deserve comfort and care." I almost whispered, "This is my home," but even to my own ears it sounded fragile, as if I were trying to convince myself more than them. Before the conversation could continue, the phone rang in the kitchen. Jason answered. His voice dropped low, but I caught certain words. When he returned, his expression tightened. "That was someone from Dad's office," he said. "They wanted to talk to you about paperwork." I asked what paperwork. Jason shrugged. I told them anything important should go through me. It was the first moment a sharp, instinctive alarm flickered in my chest. Something was wrong, and I was beginning to feel it. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I had not felt since Edward passed. Something inside me insisted that I go to Franklin Cole's office, no matter what Jason or Tessa thought I should or should not do. I dressed carefully, choosing the navy blazer Edward always said made me look strong. For the first time in days, I felt like myself again. Jason called early, as he had every morning since the funeral. "How did you sleep, Mom? Maybe you should come stay with us for a few days. Tessa can help you with things around the house." I told him I needed to go out. There was a short pause before he asked, "Go out where?" I spoke quickly. "The pharmacy. I ran out of my blood pressure pills." "I can bring them to you," he insisted. "You don't need to drive anywhere." That familiar tightness squeezed my chest. I told him gently but firmly that I could drive myself. He sighed, long and irritated, before saying, "Fine. Just call me if you need anything." I drove downtown, gripping the wheel a little harder than usual. The 20-story glass tower of Northbridge Capitol reflected the morning sun, sharp and cold. Edward had worked there for 30 years, yet I had only seen the lobby once or twice. Today I was escorted to the executive floor, a place I had never been invited before. When I entered Franklin Cole's office, the first thing I noticed was the view. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, the skyline stretching out like a map of a life I did not know my husband carried burdens within. Franklin stood to greet me. He was a tall man in his 50s with silver hair, and the kind of tailored suit that made him look permanently composed. But his eyes held something close to worry. "Mrs. Brooks, thank you for coming," he said. "Please, have a seat." I sat across from his desk, feeling out of place among the polished wood and quiet hum of power that filled the room. Franklin began slowly, choosing each word with care. "First, I want you to know that Edward was one of our most respected employees. He was loyal, careful, honest. When he came to me 6 months ago with concerns, I took them very seriously." He walked to a file cabinet, unlocked it, and returned with a thick folder. He placed it in front of me. The weight of it alone made my heart pound. "Edward came to see me several times in the last few months of his life," Franklin said. "He told me he was worried, not about work, about family matters." I stared at the folder, unable to make my fingers move. Family. The word suddenly felt dangerous. Franklin opened the folder and turned it toward me. Pages and pages of handwritten notes. Dates, times, transcribed conversations, photocopies of documents, even printed photos I did not yet understand. "Your husband believed Jason and Tessa were trying to pressure him into signing legal papers that would give them control over your finances and medical decisions if something happened to him," Franklin said quietly. My breath caught in my throat. I shook my head slowly, but a cold dread began to settle deep in my stomach. Franklin rested one hand gently on the folder. "Mrs. Brooks, Edward didn't want to worry you until he was sure. And he was sure something was very, very wrong." I finally touched the edge of the first page. That moment was the beginning of the truth unraveling. I had barely begun reading the first page when a sharp knock rattled the office door. Franklin's eyes flicked toward it with attention I did not understand. Before he could respond, the door swung open. Jason and Tessa stood in the doorway. For a moment, none of us spoke. Jason's expression held something between anger and shock, while Tessa wore the same careful smile she used whenever she wanted to appear harmless. But there was nothing harmless about the way they stepped into the room. "Mom," Jason said slowly, "what are you doing here?" His tone was not surprised. It was accusatory, like I had done something wrong simply by showing up somewhere without their permission. Tessa added quickly, "We were so worried when you weren't at home. You should have told us where you were going. We just want to help you." "You should not be making decisions alone," Jason continued, glancing at the folder on Franklin's desk as if he wanted to snatch it away. Franklin stood, shoulders squared. "This is a private meeting," he said calmly. "I need to ask you both to step outside." Tessa let out a soft laugh. "With all due respect, Mr. Cole, Marilyn is grieving. She is not in the right state of mind for serious conversations. She needs family supervision." Her words felt like a slap. "I am 68, not 6, I said, but my voice trembled. Jason frowned at me as if I were a disobedient child. "Mom, you are vulnerable right now? Dad's gone. We need to protect you from people who might manipulate you." Manipulate. The irony nearly choked me. Something inside me shifted. A quiet, rising anger. Franklin gently touched my arm. "Mrs. Brooks, may I speak with you outside for a moment?" I shook my head. "No, let's talk here, with everyone present." Jason's gaze darted to the folder again. "What did he show you? Nothing important, right? You know how people exaggerate when money is involved." Money. The way he said it made something click in my mind. "How do you know about your father's finances?" I asked quietly. "How do you know about his insurance? His savings?" Tessa's smile faltered for the first time. "We just assumed," she whispered. But Jason's jaw tightened. "Dad mentioned it a few months ago," he said. "He told us he wanted to make sure you were taken care of, if something happened." "Funny," I replied softly. "He never mentioned these conversations to me." Silence swallowed the room. Then, from the private lounge connected to Franklin's office, I heard it. A cough. A familiar cough. A sound I had heard thousands of times across a lifetime. A sound that should not exist anymore. My heart nearly stopped as the door to the lounge opened. Edward stepped out. He was thinner, paler, his hair was messy, as though he had been hiding away for days. But he was alive. Breathing, standing, looking at me with eyes full of pain and apology. "Hello, Marilyn," he said softly. My knees buckled. The only reason I didn't hit the floor was because Edward rushed forward and caught me, just as he had done so many times in our life together. Jason staggered back, face drained of color. "We buried you. There was a funeral." "There was a funeral," Edward said, "but there was no body in that casket, and there was a reason for that." I touched his face with shaking hands, needing proof that he was real. Warm skin, real breath, a heartbeat under my palm. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you do this?" Edward straightened, placing himself slightly in front of me, like a shield. "Because," he said, turning toward Jason and Tessa, "it was the only way to protect her from the two of you." In the days that followed, everything felt unreal. Edward stayed in a discreet hotel while Franklin coordinated the legal steps needed to bring him back into the world without causing chaos. Meanwhile, I returned home to a silence that felt heavier than grief. I kept replaying every moment of the confrontation in Franklin's office. Every word, every lie, every truth. For 48 hours, Jason and Tessa did not call. Then, on Wednesday morning, I saw their car pull into my driveway. I stood at the window and watched them walk toward the door. Jason's shoulders were tense, his movements sharp. Tessa walked a half step behind him, her posture softer, but her eyes darted around nervously. I opened the door before they could knock. "Mom," Jason began, sounding rehearsed. "We need to talk about what happened. There are misunderstandings." I stepped aside long enough for them to enter, but I did not invite them to sit. They stood in the living room, a room that had once held birthday parties and Christmas mornings and laughter. Now it felt like a courtroom. Tessa spoke first, her voice low and shaky. "Marilyn, we never wanted things to look the way they did. We were under a lot of stress. Bills, debts, pressure." "Pressure does not give you the right to steal from me," I said quietly. Jason shot her a warning look and stepped forward. "Mom, Dad manipulated you. He faked his own death. That's not the behavior of a sane man. You can't trust anything he says." I met his eyes. "Your father did what he did because he had proof you were planning to take control of my life. My home, my savings." Jason's jaw tightened. "We were trying to protect you." "Protect me," I repeated, "by opening credit cards in my name, by lying to doctors, by trying to put me in a facility against my will." Tessa shook her head quickly. It wasn't like that. Maplewood Haven is a beautiful community. You would have been comfortable there. Against my will, I said again. Before they could answer, the front door opened and Edward stepped inside. He looked calmer than he had in days. Jason spun around. Dad, Jason whispered. This is insane. We need to deal with this as a family. Edward walked to my side and took my hand. We are dealing with this as a family, he said. And here is the decision your mother and I have made. Jason straightened, bracing himself. You are no longer part of our lives, Edward said. We don't want to see you or hear from you or have you involved in anything we own or anything we do. You can't do that, Jason snapped. I'm your son. Edward shook his head. You stopped being our family the day you decided our deaths were more convenient than our lives. The room went still. I took a breath, steady for the first time in months. Leave, I said, and take whatever illusion you had of controlling me with you. Jason opened his mouth as if to argue, but no sound came out. Tessa tugged his sleeve. They walked out of our home and out of our lives. The door clicked shut behind them, quiet but final. 6 months passed, and life looked nothing like the storm we had survived. Edward and I sold the house in Ohio, the one that had become a battlefield instead of a home. We settled in Willow Ridge, a quiet town in Colorado with wide open skies and a view of the mountains that seemed to breathe peace into everything. Our new house was smaller, warmer, and easier to care for. It had a wraparound porch where Edward liked to read the paper in the mornings, and a patch of land he turned into a garden the moment spring arrived. Watching him kneel in the dirt, planting roses like the ones he always dreamed of growing, felt like watching him rebuild pieces of himself. The legal consequences of his staged death were less severe than we feared. There were fines and community service, but once the court saw the full evidence of what Jason and Tessa had done, compassion-tempered judgment, the fraudulent credit cards, the forged medical notes, the attempt to declare me incompetent, all of it pointed to elder financial abuse, something the judge said he had seen far too often. Jason received 18 months of probation for financial fraud and mandatory counseling. Tessa lost her nursing license. Their marriage unraveled soon after, each blaming the other for the choices they had made together. I did not feel triumph, only closure, a door that needed to shut so I could breathe again. In Willow Ridge, we found more than a new address. We found community. Our neighbors, Helen and Mark Dawson, invited us to dinner one evening, and during dessert, Helen shared that they, too, had cut ties with their adult son 10 years earlier. Addiction, lies, a cycle that nearly destroyed them. We tried everything, she said quietly, but loving him did not mean letting him ruin us. Her words slipped into my heart like a key fitting a hidden lock. I did not know how much I needed to hear that we were not alone, that other parents had faced impossible choices, that sometimes love requires stepping back, not leaning in. Slowly, I began to feel lighter. I joined a local book club. Edward volunteered at the community garden. We learned the names of the people at the market. We learned how to live gently again. One evening, as we cooked dinner together, I realized that for the first time in years I was not living in fear or confusion or guilt. I was simply living. And that was enough. One quiet morning, I woke to the soft clinking of a mug on my nightstand. Edward had brought me coffee, the way he often did now. But beside the mug was an envelope with my name written in handwriting as well as my own breath. Jason. Edward did not say anything. He simply nodded toward the envelope and stepped out, giving me space. I held the letter for a long time before opening it. The familiar loops and lines of Jason's handwriting made my chest tighten. Inside, his words were nothing like the angry young man who had stood in my living room months earlier. Mom, the letter began. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I'm in therapy now. My counselor says I've lived my whole life believing I was owed things I never earned. I see it now. I see what I did to you and Dad. He wrote about the divorce, about losing more than he ever expected, about feeling stripped down to the truth of who he had become. He said he wasn't asking for forgiveness, only understanding, only time. When I finished reading, I set the letter on my lap and looked out the window. The mountains were quiet, steady, unmoved. Words were easy, change was not. Later that afternoon, while Edward worked in the garden, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter of my own. But it wasn't to Jason. It was to myself. Dear 68-year-old Marilyn, I wrote at the top of the page, Forgive yourself for loving so deeply that you did not see the danger. Forgive yourself for trusting so fully that you missed the signs. And forgive yourself for believing that family love could never turn into something that harmed you. But also remember this: when the truth revealed itself, you stood up, you chose your safety. You chose your life, you chose peace over guilt. That kind of courage deserves to be honored. That evening, Edward and I sat on the porch as the sky shifted into soft shades of gold and lavender. He asked if I regretted cutting Jason out of our lives. I told him the truth. No, I regret not seeing it sooner, but I do not regret choosing us. If you are listening to my story and any part of it echoes your own life, let me tell you this: you deserve safety, you deserve respect, you deserve peace. If this story touched you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and let me know where you are watching from. And if you want more real stories like this, make sure to subscribe.